Okay, there we go. Awesome.
I love how every time we're like surprised that it works.
Yeah, I don't know. There's always like a second of lag, but here we are, episode 42 of Office Hours.
That it works.
First and foremost,
Yeah, I don't know. There's always like a second of lag, but here we are, episode 42.
What is happening? What am I hearing?
Of
I'm definitely hearing myself in the background. I have no idea where that's coming from. Let me see if I
That
can.
might have, no. I think that was me because I had.
Okay. I was like, oh no. Okay, no worries. All right, perfect. Let's try it again. Episode 42. Yo, first and foremost, I just wanted to say thank you all for 400 subscribers. Yeah, I feel like I say this again every single time. Like, I never in my wildest dreams thought we'd hit 100 this soon. But to hit 400 like this is crazy. My gosh, YouTube, give us that community tab, damn it. But still, thank you for subscribing. Thank you for sharing the videos. It means a ton to us, honestly.
Yes, it does. It does. And sorry, I'm like, my brain is still transitioning and there's a lot happening. 400 subscribers, which is amazing. And we're so grateful for all of you who like support us. I don't think people realize how anxious I get every time before we come on this. And so like even the reshares, the comments, like it's just super affirming. And so thank y'all for riding with us, for showing up on Twitter Spaces and Instagram Live and like all the ways that for retweeting when we're like promoting something. So thank you all. And if you can just keep doing that, that would be amazing. Hit the subscribe, leave a comment, share with your folks. You've heard me say this before, but one of the ways that we start to change the music industry is by making some of the things that Sto and I talk about normal rather than like such a weird or such a like, uncommon thing to say or practice. So thank you all for like rocking with us for real. I also want to share with you that Sto and I are teaching a workshop on newsletters, which as much as like, that Sto tells you to get a website, I think newsletters is even more important. Definitely like one of the top 3 things you should have as any kind of small business entrepreneur creative. So I'm going to drop that link in the chat for y'all to check out. Email oh.eventbrite.com. You'll like leave with a whole newsletter ready to go. And the first 3 people to sign up get $30 off. But our Zoom like workshops are not like everyone else's. I promise you they're like fun and engaging and like personable, like you can feel at home. And there's a ton of like hands-on activity. So you'll really like dig into doing some of the things and you'll leave with a draft of your newsletter. So this will be the fifth time that we're offering this and have gotten really good reviews from people in the past. So check that out if you're interested. And then today, y'all, we're talking about relationships as creative entrepreneurs. So if you have stories you want to share, your happily ever afters, but also some of the maybe more not so great things, feel free to share those in the comments. If you have questions, let's jump into it. Sto, where do you want to start?
I think like one of the more interesting aspects I think of this is like what and by the way, if you're watching this afterwards, this link is in the description too if I didn't mess it up. Is like, as creative, whether you're creative, whether you're an entrepreneur or a creative entrepreneur, I feel like our schedules, our time, how we manage time and stuff like that is just, I don't want to say completely different because I feel like everyone's struggling with something, but I feel like how we have to kind of maneuver or slide things over depending on what's happening, or like, I know some of us be in calls like super late at night because our clients are in a different part of the world, all that stuff I feel like plays a part in relationships. And obviously I'm literally just barely scratching the surface with that statement, but I think that's something that's important is like the requirements that creatives, I guess, need in relationships that can be kind of different from, others.
I think because there's so much, it's 2 things, right? One is like, there's so much unpredictability in And whether
Right.
you're creative or entrepreneur, like sometimes I work on Mondays, sometimes I don't. Sometimes I'm like with a client until 9 o'clock at night. Sometimes I'm home really, like it's so
Exactly.
unpredictable. And there's not a lot of structure to it. So if you're working like a traditional corporate job, you know that you get up in the morning, you go to the office, and you come home. For creatives, it might mean one day you're at the studio, the next day you're working out of a coffee shop, the next day you're like on the like. And so I think part of what that does in a relationship is if you're not good at communicating, and if you're not good at setting boundaries, and if you're not good at creating work-life balance, it creates a lot of space to allow the relationship or to allow the business to become a problematic factor in the relationship. And it can be, I think it can be manipulated in unhealthy ways where you're like, oh, I have to cancel all the time because work came up. Or, oh, I can't commit to you because I don't know what my schedule is going to be like. And things like that that I think can create insecurity, inconsistency in relationships. And so to me, that's where I think that's one of the places that it can cause a lot of friction and make it hard to be with someone like that, especially if they're in the headspace of like my business comes first and are not good at communicating that. So you've created an expectation with someone that you're like in a relationship and you're all in and they have equal priority, but in reality, you're treating them like they don't. It can create, I think, a lot of gaslighting. That's what I'm trying to get at. It can create a lot of gaslighting and toxicity in a relationship because you put people in a situation where they want to support you, but also they have a right for their needs to be met. And so I've seen this, and I've seen this like on Twitter. This comes up in like Twitter conversations all the time, right? You see people like debating these kinds of things.
Right.
But I think it can create a really unhealthy dynamic where you're like, well, if you loved me, you wouldn't be mad that I was working really late. But also you're using working really late as a way to disregard someone else's feelings or time or whatever it might be. And so I think that's one of the and not to say that this doesn't happen in other, like obviously this is not
Right.
unique to us in any way, but it's one of the things that I see get played out a lot. And it's hard, and it puts people in a situation where like if they can't identify the behavior, it's like a catch-22.
Mm-hmm. And again, I think that's why, I mean, I feel like we talk about this in all vast types of relationships throughout the course of this whole 42 episode arc that we've been on so far, is that communication is so important. Because like if it, again, and like Nora said, it's not just if you're creative or whatever, regardless of the industry that you're working in, like you have to be able to communicate with the other person. Like, yo, like your how your hours work or how your finances are working or the timeline or whatever, it's different from, you know, I don't even like saying like, you know, you corporate 9 to 5 or whatever, because I feel like that's like boxing it in. But like there's different needs at different times and stuff like that, especially when, and even when you throw freelancer into that
Mm-hmm.
mix too, it blows everything up and makes things complicated. So I think I do think that's why communication is just so important when you're dealing with a creative. And I wanted to bring up this because I'm curious how you feel about this, because I've seen it discussed on Twitter, obviously over the last couple of weeks, but definitely like over the years, is like the whole studio time thing.
Mm-hmm.
We see so many times of like, I've seen it on both men and women, like, yo, like if I'm in the studio, don't bother me. Or if I need to write something, or if I'm in the zone, or I'm working on the album, or I'm with the engineer, or I'm filming a music video, like don't bother me. But I think I don't always think that's fair. So I'm curious how you feel about stuff like that. Like I get this, I get I totally understand why someone would say that, because you can't be constantly like in and out, in and out, in and out. But I also feel like obviously the person has the right to want to hear from you.
See, I think it's one of those things that can easily be manipulated. So a lot of it
What do you mean?
depends on, like, I could tell you, don't bother me. And then
Right.
instead of being at the studio, I could be over here doing something else, or I could be like.
But what if they're really at the studio though?
So
That's what I'm saying.
I
Like
think
if you
it's-
lying, like come on now, like if you're lying, like that's a completely different. Like we need to do manipulation 101 at some point or something.
I mean, we should do manipulation, especially now with all the conversation around. Anyways, yes, we should. But I think that, okay, assuming like everyone's good intentions and like it's healthy, right? I think it's perfectly okay for people to be inaccessible, to have their own time. Like we all need that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think you can also communicate. Like this is why I think sometimes people want to control things, or like it's about power versus about I really need to be alone right now. So it's nothing for you to be like, I'll be in the studio from 10 to 6 tonight, just so you know, I won't have my phone or I won't be able to text you, but I will text you when I'm done. And then you text them when I'm done. Right? Like
right.
That's your limit. Then I can either accept that boundary or not accept that boundary, right? Versus being like, I'm gonna be in the studio all night, don't text me, and then I don't ever hear from you. So these are like, we keep saying communication, but like these are ways that you can communicate. So I don't think like being off, it's the same thing if you're like, oh, I'm in meetings all afternoon. Or this is a good comment.
Yeah.
Tanaja, welcome to Office Hours.
Yeah, welcome.
And I hope I'm pronouncing
Big fan.
it correctly. Tanaja says, I think communicating your boundaries towards your career is super helpful at keeping the peace. And I think that's true on both, and assuming it's like a dyad partnership. I think that's important on both sides for you to say, look, this is what it looks like when I'm in album creation mode. This is what it looks like when I'm promoting. This is what I need. Like, because that's also the other part. You might meet someone when they're in promo mode, and that's not the same thing as when they're in creation mode. And so being able to communicate that, and then the non like create, like the other partner, right? Says, okay, well, this is what I need also. I need you to communicate. Or I'm not comfortable with this, and then you can decide together if it works or if it doesn't work. I think one of the problems is also when people have misconceptions about what creative entrepreneurship is like. Oh, good. I'm so glad.
Like so many levels.
So they have misconceptions, or they think, well, it'll change, or I'll just go to the studio all the time, or, oh, we'll just try, like, it'll be so fun. We're on the road, we're traveling, and not seeing that as like work. So, right. So, I think that's part of it, is like communicating your boundaries, but also really being honest with yourself about what you want and what you need, and accepting that like someone's not going to change because they're now you're there in a relationship with them and you get to be at the studio all the time.
Right.
Yeah. And I think along that line is also like having clear conversations about your expectations around like groupies and fans. Like, like there are artists who like social media, right? Like I know artists whose whole thing is that they're like super sexy, right? And like they're ladies' man. Well, what does that mean when you get into a relationship? Do you then make that public, or do you keep your public persona of being like this sexy playboy, but then keep your girlfriends, like these are all things that have conversations about on both sides.
Word. All right. I'm going to ask you like a pretty hot question here in a second. But before then, it's halftime. So I just want to make sure, first off, thank you all for watching. Make sure you hit the links in the description. Leave a like. I've been forgetting to say that. Leave a like. Honestly, that's what helps us get in front of more people. It's what the YouTube, Google gods determine our worth by. So please leave a like. But also leave a comment. We love having kind of like side discussions, I guess, like this that are, not necessarily like, all right, get a website and make sure your social media is all together. Though that is important, okay? Don't get it twisted, all right? But we like having side conversations like this. So if you've been in a relationship with a creative or a creative entrepreneur, or you've been on the other side of that, like honestly, let us know your story and your experiences. we love to hear about it. So, okay, here we go. So one of the big questions, honestly, I think I saw it like maybe last month, and obviously this isn't the first time that this has been discussed, but how do you feel about dating someone in the industry? And it doesn't even necessarily, I mean, I guess I'm currently thinking like music to music, but even something like music to like photographer or something like that. And then I actually have another follow-up question after that, but I'll ask that later.
I think I think for women in hetero relationships, the risk is higher. And I think that maybe that's something we don't talk about as much. Like, if I start to date you, people will no longer see me as Nora, the consultant, the this, the that, the hip hop festival producer. They will start to see, and this is the result of like patriarchal culture, they will start to see me as so-and-so's girlfriend. And so it like already we're talking about music, and like already we're dealing with a culture where like if I'm the only woman in the room and an artist comes in, he will 9 times out of 10 dap up all the dudes and walk right by me, even though I might be the person that he's having a meeting with. And so I think that if we're talking about the struggles of like being in relationships with other people in the industry, those are some of the things that we don't talk about, but that make it especially challenging for women, where you lose your sense of like, and not saying everybody, but like these are real things that happen. The other thing, and I had, this is a personal story. I was dating a producer who low key like lost his shit when we broke up, and started to threaten me and say things like, "You'll never work in this industry again," and started like threatening to talk bad about me to like other producer. And so there's always that element because we are so relationship. It is such a relationship driven industry. And for women, and Tanaja shares, that's true, that dating as a straight woman in the industry is really hard for so many reasons. And so there's also always the risk of, if things don't go well, there's always the risk, like people will choose sides or they won't invite you into spaces anymore. And so there is real, there's like a real risk. And again, I think the risk for women is a lot harder. Because dudes don't have to think as much about things as we do. But I'm curious, so what you think of it.
I mean, I can say like from like I've had peers that have dealt with some of the same stuff that you're talking about, where so much so like and there's so many layers to this. Like we could talk all day about like men stealing credit from women that have been doing work and stuff like that. We can talk about that all day. So like we had a peer that was dating someone, and like when that fell apart, he lost it and started like saying bad things about her in other rooms, and like that again, that trickles down to when you're trying to get jobs and trying to work with other people. And again, like I said, we could go down the line all day long about how that affects people in the industry and stuff like that. So I've seen that for sure. I mean, on my side, obviously, like I don't have as much conflict because I'm not really out there like that. But I think at the end of the day, what it really comes down to is, number one, like having that genuine mutual respect for your partner, period. I think there's a lot of like power dynamics, at least in what we see in some obviously mainstream relationships. But I've seen it at the underground independent level. And, if you've ever been to like a festival or something like that, and like you're behind the scene, or even not even behind the scenes, like you've seen some of that stuff in real time. So I think it's about having genuine respect for whatever it is that your partner does. And again, I go back to this all the time. I really do think that communicating what your needs are and making sure that you're listening to what your partner's needs are is so important when it comes to like dealing with the industry as a whole and stuff like that.
So I think part of it though is, so I don't think any of the men in the industry think that they're like disrespecting women. Like the dudes who have been the most fucked up are sometimes the ones who like think that they're the greatest. And I think part of it is what men think of, like there's so much, and again, we're talking about like straight cis het relationships for the most part, right? Men don't know that they carry all these biases with them. And so then they adapt it. And I think one of the ways that it shows up is in the ways that we think about labor. So we culturally don't recognize so much of the work that women do as work. Women are conditioned to carry the mental load. We do a lot of the emotional labor. And so then when we enter a relationship with someone where we're not just intimate, but we're also like, we have a personal relationship and we have a professional relationship, I think part of the problem is that it blurs the lines of work. So you're doing something, and this goes back to your point though, about like women not getting credited, because we don't think that so-and-so is doing work. We think, well, you're my girl and you love me and you just do that for me because I'm just so great and wonderful, versus looking at it as like, oh, this is what you do and we're doing it together. And so that's a huge part of where women's work goes unacknowledged, uncredited. And so then when we talk about things like respect, if you as a dude aren't aware of how your patriarchy shows up or your misogyny shows up, you're going to think that you're being mad respectful, but then carry on, but still expect like the woman in the room to take the notes, or expect your girl to go get everyone coffee, or which are all things that I've seen. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
So if we're really talking about how do we create like healthier relationships, I think it starts a lot with people starting to investigate their own biases and expectations and like ideas about gender roles, because then it shows up, and I think those things get kind of exasperated when you have that dual relationship of personal and professional, especially in industries that are already so male dominated even after all these years.
And listen, fellas, I know you don't want to hear this stuff. I get it. But we really need to be paying attention. We need to be listening. Some of y'all don't like to listen when women are talking about their experiences and stuff like that. I get it. We're all trying to do our best, and a lot of us are doing our best, but there's still a long way to go, I think, in terms of making sure that we're being respectful, that we're learning how to communicate properly. It's guess what, people? Yelling is communicating, but we need to learn how to communicate properly. So, like I said, and part of communicating is listening. I'm gonna keep saying it. I don't care. Listen when people are talking about their experience in the industry, because it is real. And again, everything that Nora has said, I have seen with my own eyes. Not like seen her like go through it, but I've seen like other people in my circle go through it too. So this isn't just like something that rarely happens. It happens all the time, and we see it all the time, almost daily, if you just hop on social media for a second. So pay attention, listen, and try to get better every day, for real.
Real quickly, for those of you who are here, welcome to Office Hours. If you have thoughts on what we're talking about, questions, we're talking about dating a creative entrepreneur, feel free to drop those in the chat. We'd love to hear your own love stories or not so love stories. Did you ask? You said you had a follow-up question. Did you ask that, Sto?
Dang, it was such a good one, and I completely forgot what it was. Dang, what was it? Nope, I got nothing. I have no idea what I was going to ask.
I'm so curious.
Nope. Yeah, no, it'll come back to me, hopefully.
Oh, thank you.
Good.
Akuna says, loving this, y'all. So glad. I have a question. How do you look at people, and again, we're like music specific today, artists who date fans, or who, is there a power imbalance, or what does that look like? Are there healthy or unhealthy ways for that relationship to happen?
Sheesh, you know what? I think damn. Because I've seen both sides at this point. Like I used to be a person I was like, yo, don't do it. Like that's an awful idea. It's gonna backfire one way or another. Either someone's gonna mess up or someone's gonna get their feelings hurt. And especially when you're on like, again, even at the independent level, like, oh geez, yeah. I've seen it on both sides where like it just explodes and you just scrolling through Twitter trying to get some work done, you just see a huge thread from both sides of people just slam dunking each other. So but I guess that's with any relationship. So I don't know. But it just doesn't sound like a great idea. But on the other hand, I have seen, you know, relationships that have blossomed into something absolutely incredible that started off as like just like a fan. And again, both ways. I've seen men that started off as quote groupies or whatever, and like they knew what it was like too. And I was just like, bruh, like don't do that. And then it blossomed into something that's incredible. Like he's hyping her up and stuff like that. But then I've seen it go the other way. So I again, if in a different timeline, like I would like to think like on Earth 1, 2, and 3, there's no version of me that would ever date a groupie or a fan or anything like that. It just does not sound like a great idea. And I do think there can be those power dynamics because we've seen that. How many times have we seen that? Like over the last few years, even of just like people taking complete advantage of fans and stuff like that on like, you know, a crazy scale. So, you know, I don't always think it's the best idea, but again, if it really does work and there really is, again, there's that communication because that's what it was with the couples that did work out. There was so much communication and sure, there were ups and downs. It's not always just like sunshine and rainbows and stuff like that, but like they communicated and they worked through things to the point where like they're both supporting each other and it's just regardless of the medium. So I don't know, it can work, but be careful.
So you made me think of two things. And one is what's like so often as a creative or an entrepreneur, you think of your project as like your main priority, your baby, and it's just as important to support whatever else your partner is into. Like,
right, absolutely.
Like this is one of the ways that I would define respect is even though you don't understand what they're doing or it's not your thing, to give the same amount of investment, time, energy that you would want in return. Like that seems like a basic thing to say, but I don't know that it always works that way because I've seen people
almost never does. Oh my goodness, I can go on about that forever.
Yeah. And the other thing that I want to make sure I mention is if you are, because for me, like in ideals, I would love to like collaborate with my partner. Like to me, that's an amazing, beautiful thing, right? And we've seen beautiful collaborations in music happen to people who you're like, oh, they were also messing around. That's why that album.
Right.
If that's what you're doing, Sandroid, I see your question and we'll answer it in just a second. Thank you for asking it. If that's what you're doing, you still want to make sure that you're treating the collaboration and protecting it the same way you would any other business transaction. So even though like that's your partner, y'all are lovey-dovey, whatever, sit down and talk about, like you hear Sto and I say this all the time, create a contract, have your partnership agreement in place so that if you never break up, great, awesome, we're rooting for you. But if you do break up, what happens to the collaboration? What happens to the business? And that's one of the ways, again, especially as women, that we can protect ourselves from partners who will take credit or try to discredit you or take your rights away or not give you the money you're owed or this, that, and the other, because we've seen this happen. And so it's an uncomfortable thing to go up to your partner and be like, bro, let's write a contract around this project that we're doing. But it is one of the ways that you can protect yourself. Sandroid asks, how do you go about examining and challenging your biases in dating and how that affects work? So do you want to talk about some of the ways you've done it or that's been helpful for you?
I mean, I think again, like I think a lot of it comes down to actually like listening and paying attention. I think a lot of us, especially as creatives, like we get like locked into our process and our routine and stuff like that, and it can be hard for us to like deviate and like see. I don't want to say see the other side, but like understand that, like, listen, like as creatives, like we are so, like Nora said, like our creations and what we're doing art wise or whatever, regardless of whether it's, again, whether you're making music, beats, doing food stuff, fitness, whatever it is, we're really passionate about that. So I think sometimes when like dating and partners get involved, like we sometimes feel like, oh no, like you're trying to, get at my passion or whatever. But for me as someone who's like more romantic than I'd like to admit, like I'd like to think that I do put, my relationships and stuff like that above my work. But I also understand there's a lot of people where it doesn't work like that. So I do think it's about having those conversations and listening and actually like and working together. That's really what it is, I think, is working together to really understand, okay, to not just understand yourself, but also your partner and what they need and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think starting with that self-reflection piece is really important, and asking yourself, like, what are my biases about women? What are my what stereotypes do I carry? What prejudices do I have? And just ask yourself and ask those questions over and over again. If any of you are doing anti-racist work, that's also a good way to start to unlearn your white supremacy. So this can apply to like all the things, right? But just to start asking yourself those questions and investigating or being curious about, is this really true, or is this what I've been taught to be true or been conditioned to believe? So that's one thing. Another thing is following women and non-binary folks and queer folks in the industry and really like listening. So the thing about that is oftentimes when we hear something that is counter to how we see ourselves, it evokes like a defensiveness. And so really pay attention to, like, am I getting defensive right now? Like, y'all, one of my litmus tests when I'm like on dates and stuff is I'll ask dudes how they feel about J. Cole, and I'll share my own critiques of J. Cole because I think he's misogynistic. And it's amazing to see how many times men who see themselves as good guys, nice guys, will jump to J. Cole's defense because they don't want to see themselves, right? They align themselves with J. Cole, like they see themselves like the same. And so they don't want to see that those things are true about themselves. So rather than being curious or investigative, they get defensive and push back and want to argue and debate rather than like looking at my points or my analysis, right? So that part of, if it's making you uncomfortable, it's probably something you should lean into and explore more. If when you hear a woman talk about her experience, or you hear someone talk about like what they need or they want, if your first reaction is to question it or challenge it, that's probably a point to kind of explore in. So really like follow more women and listen to them and all of that kind of stuff. And then the third thing I would say is there's also a huge body of like feminist literature around this stuff. Bell Hooks, Trisha Rose. There's a ton of like people who are, and so listen to that stuff or read that stuff or watch YouTube videos about that stuff so that you can understand how these things that we're talking about don't exist in a vacuum, right? And we're conditioned by culture and things that are like this whole thing with Kanye right now and like how fucking abusive he's being. And everyone's like, oh, it's fine. And they're like making jokes and like is how we're looking at the way our culture upholds domestic violence. Like that's abuse and we've turned it into a joke. But if we don't stop to investigate the ways that sexism and like our ideas about relationships exist on a cultural level, then we can't unpack it in an individual like dynamic. So these are all things that like really is personal work. But then if you can look at the ways to make cultural connections to it, then you can start to and then you're going to make mistakes and that's okay. Like that's part of the process, but take that as an opportunity to learn. That's like my 3-point plan for unlearning your own biases.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you just pay attention without immediately responding, I promise you'll learn something. But holy moly, what time is it? Oh my God, it's after 8:30. Okay, that's fine though. Yo, honestly, thank you all for even tuning in to Office Hours today. Again, we like doing these kind of like side episodes because at the end of the day, it's still important. Still important to talk about these things. It's still important to have these discussions and stuff like that. Again, remember to leave a like, leave a comment. Let us know your experience. Let us know, again, what your any questions that you have or issues that you faced dating a creative or creative entrepreneur. Again, oh, go ahead.
Sorry. Also, if you have more topics like this that you'd like me and Sto to talk about, drop those suggestions in the comments.
Right.
Because it helps us to hear from you and to create stuff that you want. Like this one, I think we were both a little like anxious about. Like, should we talk about it? How personal do we want to get? But it's been really lovely to see all of you like hang out with us consistently in the comments and the engagement. So if you want more stuff like this, tell us, and we'd love to build content around you. Also, don't forget our newsletter workshop is happening on the 26th. And you'll leave with the newsletter and basically learn to write emails that people will read and respond to and click through. So link for that is on your screen, and it's also in the description below.
Yeah, it should be in all caps. If I didn't mess it up, I'll definitely check as soon as I'm done here. But yeah, definitely check that out. Again, let us know if you have any questions or anything like that. Definitely would want to learn more about how to spot manipulation patterns. All right, manipulation 101 incoming. Yeah, we'll definitely keep that in mind for sure. But yeah, thank you all for tuning in. This is actually one of our longer episodes, but we hope you enjoyed. And yeah, we're definitely going to do something like this again. Don't remember what we're doing in 2 weeks, but make sure you're following us on Instagram and Twitter because we're going to be on both of those platforms next week on Tuesday and Thursday, respectively, I think. Actually in reverse. IG on next Tuesday, Twitter next Thursday. There you go. Oh my goodness. All right, everyone. Drink some water, get a damn website. You already know what it is.